Thank you for joining me. I ahead of this session, I refused to prep for it, and I have been accused of being complacent about this session on complacency. So thank you for allowing me to be complacent. So I think about complacency a lot. I don't think we spend 3 days talking about things that are wrong with the world and maybe sometimes how we can get out of it. So we don't need to explain that. But I thought it would be really great to think together about, because clearly my brain is not enough, and after 3 days there's not much brain left, but I thought it would be great to think together about what complacency is. And I couldn't think of 4 people who are more antidote to complacency than you guys. So I really appreciate you joining me for this. I think my first question is, and go in any order that you want, like, how do you think we spot complacency in ourselves? Because we often see it in others, and I see so much of it, but then I wonder, well, no one says, yes, I'm very complacent.
Well, I think everybody has a different form of complacency. I don't think it's standard. I don't think you can go, I'm being complacent, you're being complacent. We all, luckily, find our inner activism or our action in different areas. You know, you might see me in an environment and think I'm incredibly complacent about one thing, but I'm incredibly active about something else. So I think it's not as simple as that, because I may be being complacent about one thing that doesn't.
Yeah,
I
guess I should have qualified more. I mean, this is complacency in terms of like we're in the world that's upside down. All the certainties that we've had have been taken away from us, but the future couldn't be foggier. How did we get here? So when I think about how did we get here, I think we must have been complacent along the way. Or were we? Were we?
We were, and I'm complacent when I'm tired, and I'm very tired these days because it is an overflow of information, of trauma, of upside down world, and all of fascism, of authoritarianism. So I bring it back. I have one story from my medical practice that I recall that checked my complacency. There was a patient, 21 years old, at a pediatric hospital many years ago. So this is, again, with or without whatever administration you're living under, we're all complacent in some way. This patient was what we call neurologically devastated, was living at home on a ventilator, no brain activity, fed through a tube, and existing this way with multiple infections coming in and out of the hospital because he had a breathe through a tube in his neck and was in no way cognizant of his world. We all carry judgment, whether we like to admit it or not. And by the 7th or 8th time this patient is brought to your emergency room and is admitted and you're on call at 4 a.m, I would say that's the perfect mix of complacency. And there was a part of me that judged this woman for keeping her child alive. And so I said, every time a child is admitted to the hospital, we ask a code status. And what would you like to do if something were to go wrong? Every time it was the same answer: full code, do everything, do everything, do everything. So I finally sort of really tried to inquire. And this woman said, do you know how my son got this way? I said, tell me. He was a normal boy, 6 years old. He loved ice cream and pool parties. And we were at a pool party, and I looked away for 1 second. And he was a near drowning patient. I said, I already killed him once. I can't kill him twice. And that was my complacency, because I thought, this is so easy. This is such an easy, simple, but it's not. And until you have that nuance interjected in you to say, hey, wake up, there's more to this, then you have to check yourself.
So complacency for me is assuming that institutions and organizations and movements that articulate a positive vision of how we address all the diagnosis that you eloquently gave, that even if they're failing dismally by all standards of their own vision, that we just say, let's continue fighting. So complacency in that instance for me is about failure to actually change, that we ignore what Albert Einstein once said when he said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get different results. And so it's being complacent also about how well the fascist forces in the world, the billionaires and the oligarchs who have organized in a way that we should be willing to learn from. Not with the same messaging, but they united all their forces and have deployed them in a very, very powerful way. And we have been, if I were to say that the two things, we've been complacent about institutions that are not failing, that are failing and which actually carry some of the seeds of the problem, like international NGOs and foundations are fundamentally structurally racist, for example. And the second complacency is not getting organized, right? Because we have to understand that the only solution to this is for us to be able to reach ordinary people. And the truth is, most of us in our work in the formal civil society movement tend to speak in a language that doesn't reach ordinary people, just speaks to the head and doesn't speak to the heart, the body, and the soul.
Yay. All right. So basically, I was jolted out of complacency in October 2023 because of basically two things that happened almost simultaneously. One was former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant uttering what is genocidal intent by saying we will block food, water, electricity and fuel into Gaza, and these are, quote, human animals, and we will act accordingly. That was on the 9th of October, and I think on the 10th or on the 11th of October, the Brandenburg Gate in Germany, where I live, the Brandenburg Gate was lit up in the colors of the Israeli flag, and high-ranking German politicians said there is only one place for Germany, and that is on the side of Israel, right? So these two things, for me together, those kind of jolted me out of my kind of complacency and made me understand that if people like me don't do anything against this, which is the complicity in atrocities from the German state, and also the repressions inside Germany against Palestinians and their allies, if people like me don't do something about this, you know, it will get worse and worse, which it is. And so and since that moment, I regret having been complacent all these years, knowing what was happening to Palestinians in Gaza and also in the West Bank and in the refugee camps, having all this information at hand, having personal contact, and yet having not done anything or not enough is something I will have to live with for the rest of my life. So that jolted me out of this complacency into something that I think now there is no way back to complacency. And I feel a sense of duty to not let myself, we're all tired, you said that, right? It's totally true, we're all exhausted, but I don't allow myself to get that in the way of what I'm doing.
Did you want to say something? Yeah, it's totally, please jump in.
I was going to say the systemic complacency is what I struggle with. You know, I've been in and out of Gaza and the West Bank and worked in Palestinian refugee camps where I actually met my dear friend Natalia many years ago, but I was in Gaza in 2023 and 2024, a few months after October 7th, working as a pediatrician in the emergency room and also procuring medical supplies for Gaza, negotiating with Israeli authorities about what can and cannot happen and come in. I came back, I briefed the UN Security Council, I briefed the National Security Council, senior members of the White House, Senate Armed Services Committee. So I feel I had done everything I could, and then nothing changed. Nothing changed. I don't know where to go from there.
And Kumi, why is that? Like what Seema's example, what you say about institutional failures and us going, like the warning signs to the world that we live in now have been there all along. And you are the 4 people, and there are many others here, who have been sort of shouting. You know, we just learned on the session, like Ukraine has been shouting, like this is bad news, it's going to come for you too. Georgia is another example of a whole like country that has been shouting. Like, what's the root cause of complacency? Like, why is it?
So I think we sitting here in this gathering might be very aware of how bad things are. But most people in the world are time poor. They're doing 2 or 3 jobs sometimes to just put food on the table and so on. And to be fair to them, they're not complacent, right? They are engaged in the struggle to survive on a daily basis, right? And our failure as activists and social communicators and so on to be able to communicate and reach them, is maybe I'll just give you a simple example, right, to make the point about how language that we use is a very big part of the problem. In 2011, I occupied an oil rig in Greenland when I was at Greenpeace. I was arrested, I came out of prison, I go home, and one of my cousin's daughters says, "Uncle Kumi, what a stupid slogan." It was a slogan I was carrying, said, "Stop Arctic destruction," right? And I said, why was it a stupid slogan? But I knew, because while I was on that inflatable, bobbing along to the rig, I was scared. And the waves were big, and one of my colleagues says, "Oh no, don't worry, when you fall in, if you fall in, with what you're wearing, you'll survive at least for 1 hour and can find you." And I looked at the size of the waves and I thought, maybe they'll take more than an hour. And then I suddenly had this horrible thought. If this is the last thing I do, the message that I'm carrying, 99% of my friends, my family, and my comrades back home in Africa wouldn't know what the hell it meant. And so when I say to her, she says, "Yeah, you'll talk to yourself. Your activists are constantly talking to a very narrow band of people, and y'all are just as bad as the right wing, where they get into a silo mentality and they..." So I asked her what would be a better slogan. She said, "Well, I'm not paid to come up with slogans," but she said, for starters, a better slogan would be "Save Santa Claus now." It's brilliant if you think about it.
She's running an amazing marketing agency now.
Because she said, you'll have to connect to where people's consciousness are, not where y'all think your consciousness is. The second reason we are failing is we are operating in silos for too long. Human rights, environment, development, poverty, whatever. We need to turbocharge intersectionality right now, because the failure for us to connect different agendas is highly problematic, because we're also sometimes in competition for communication space because we have not figured out how all of these agendas are connected. The last thing I would say, as a person from the Global South, where 88% of the world's population lives. Okay, I say that one more time. I'm from the Global South, where 88% of the world's population lives. The most important thing to recognize, as Mark Carney said at Davos, this system that we've had since 1945 in place has been a complete myth. It's never worked for us. It's been an extractive, exploitative system, and we have been on the receiving end of it. And so, in a way, some people in the Global South say, okay, it's good that people in the Global North have a challenge right now, because they might wake up, like Americans might wake up and discover that they do not have a democracy, they simply have a liberal oligarchy.
They cannot afford to be complacent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
thought you wanted to add something.
I think I just a small. I mean, it's a very minor addition. I think what's interesting about this Global South question, to my mind, is that while we know that the institutions, let's say, favor the Global North quite extensively, I think countries from the Global South have started using these institutions and kind of turning it around to face kind of the Global North in its complicity. So, for example, who brought the genocide case against Israel? South Africa. Who brought the genocide case against Myanmar? The Gambia. So you have, in these examples, you have these, who brought the case against Germany, the case of complicity against genocide? Nicaragua. So you have, in these 3 examples, you have the Global South, kind of taking in this case, the ICJ, by its thorns and turning the whole thing around. Look at yourselves, kind of thing. I think that's a very powerful moment.
Mine is more down to the individual. I think the reason a lot of individuals are complacent is because they feel they have no power. They feel they have no rights. And obviously it depends which part of the world that you're in. But when you look at the situation I was in, where ostensibly I was white, middle class, privileged, educated, and when I did what I thought was normal, which was speak up, I discovered that I had no access to justice. And that was a huge shock. And I discovered that I didn't have the rights that I thought I had. And certainly when it came to 2017, where I broke my silence more comprehensively, with the being able to surf that wave of Me Too. To me, what was so important was that coming from a position essentially of privilege, I had much more of a duty to speak for the people who really can't speak and couldn't speak, because what I was finding that the majority of people coming to me weren't people who had been abused by a Weinstein or an Epstein or a Trump. They were low-paid workers who were being silenced by, their manager at McDonald's, and they were being given £200 and silenced and losing their job. And those people had no voice at all. And so, they had even less power. And I think as an individual, it's always very hard to believe that you have power, and the language that is used around speaking up is whistleblowing and being brave, which actually makes it harder to do those things. So I think, understanding your rights as an individual, believing that as one person you can push, and if you push, others will follow.
And what do you guys think makes all of you not complacent? Because I know I appreciate the examples of your own complacency, but I think for me, you're examples of people who are the opposite of complacency. What do you think is it? Is it your parents? Is it like a moment in life?
For me, it's I feel very privileged because I do go to areas of war, and I learn from my Palestinian colleagues or my Syrian or Iraqi colleagues, Ukrainian colleagues, and then I'm able to come back. And they are the ones most of the time, especially in the Middle East, saying, please tell my story. So the patients that I see, yes, that's very rewarding. It's a very microcosmic reward. But when a journalist writes something, when a politician changes something, that is affecting a macro world. And that helps me keep going, but also personally as a child and grandchild of refugees, I'm doing this in service of them. They crossed an ocean, not for me to be silent. That's why I'm doing this.
Me? I think I answered that question when I spoke in the beginning.
Yeah, you did answer that.
So,
yeah.
but if I can add, I mean, basically, I think this is also what you were saying. We are being driven by something that is outside of our control. So, if I say I'm going to become active against the complicity in genocide of the German state because I live in Germany, so the only thing that will stop me from doing that is if it stops. Basically, there's nothing else that's going to stop me except, physical violence, basically. But that's basically what's driving me personally, but also what's driving many others to keep going beyond the exhaustion, beyond the and to also maybe add to what was said, that the idea that we have to do these things collectively, I think is very important. Because alone it's a bit it's a suicidal mission, kind of. It doesn't do anything. But if we come together and join forces in this way, that we also connect these different issues that are connected, they're clearly connected. It's not a huge and brilliant insight. Then we are much stronger, and we can actually do something much more effective.
I just remember in Black Lives Matter, when those protests were happening, the Palestinians were writing letters to protesters in America. We've dealt with this state violence. This is what you need to do to protect yourself. And that speaks to the collective, which I think in general progressives is bad.
Yeah, that's right. Except obviously that happens when it's almost like too late, right? So how do we connect the signals and connect the dots even before? Like, how do we make others come with us before it's too late?
So we need to be better at scanning our environment. And there are, like, for example, Civicus World Alliance for Citizen Participation which defends the rights of civil society as an early warning system to track when governments are trying to impose restrictions, and there are signs that are there. Like, I mean, Donald Trump, for example, is following a unconventional authoritarian playbook, right? Fascists have done this all the time. Divide people on the basis of identity, attack the media, attack institutions, undermine institutions, and create a us versus them situation. Can I answer the other question that
Yeah,
you
you
asked?
can. Yeah.
So I was trying to think about it, and why I passed it on to you, I was trying to think. I thought I needed something. So for me personally, I was a product of the South African liberation struggle in Mandela's movement, and I think the thing that has kept me going since a 15-year-old that joined the struggle was, as I was fleeing into exile at the age of 22, one of my friends, closest friends, said to me, we were fleeing the country in different directions, and he asked me, what is the biggest contribution we can make to the cause of humanity? And I said, oh, that's an easy question, giving your life. He said, you mean like what's happening in our country where people are getting killed all the time and becoming martyrs? I said, yeah. He said, that's the wrong answer. He said, it's not giving your life, but it's giving the rest of your life. I was 22 years old that time. My friend Lenny was way ahead of us. In fact, at that time, he was only one of 5,000 voluntary vegetarians on the entire African continent. Right? He got environmental justice in a way that we didn't. Sadly, 2 years later, he was murdered brutally with 3 young women from my home city, Durban. And I had to think about the distinction that he made between giving your life versus giving the rest of your life. What he was saying is that the struggle for justice, whether it's gender justice, economic justice, social justice, climate justice, these struggles are marathons and they're not sprints. And that the best contribution we can make is, once we are aware of that injustice, is stay true to that cause and persevere and push and push and push. Because the truth is, the choice of choosing to be an activist is a choice of saying you're going to fail most of your life. Because the systems that we are going up against are very powerful and often seem, untouchable. The other thing that keeps me personally going is how I see the world. Because I think the biggest disease, you might disagree with me from a medical point of view, the biggest disease we face in the world, which is looking us in the face for more than centuries now, is a disease we can call affluenza. So affluenza is a pathological illness where rich and poor alike have been led to believe that a good, meaningful, happy life comes from more and more and more material acquisitions. So you might not have a park, you might not have a river that you can go fish, but if you have money, it's okay. So I think that the challenge for us now is to do an honest diagnosis of why is it we are failing. And yeah, I would say that the big thing is, in terms of language, we speak a language that does not reach ordinary people, right? 90% of people in the world, like say, okay, I'm going to do a quick quiz. When you go home this weekend, and then let's say next weekend, you have a family brunch or lunch, right? Friends and family lunch. How many of you feel absolutely confident you can describe to them the very important event that you've been at here at ZEG, and that they will understand what you are talking about? Okay. 4 people, 5 people, 7 people are lucky they got very progressive families. The rest of us don't have those. So, and ZEG, and for me is so important, is we have to tell better stories.
Yeah, and so I will add on to that is people, like I said, I've worked in areas of conflict and war, and people constantly ask me, why do you live in Houston, Texas? Why do you practice there? I said, because that's the next front line. That's exactly the bellwether for whether it's immigration, ICE officials roaming, children's hospitals, whether it's children being transported and separated from their parents, whether it's trans rights under attack, whether it's women dying in a parking lot because they've been denied health care because it's considered an abortion, even though it was an ectopic pregnancy. That's where we need, those are the places we don't need to be in New York and LA. Their freedoms are very much protected and they're very wealthy cities for most of the part. And the people that need access to abortion will still get access.
But Seema, do you feel, and this is kind of a question for you as well, Michael, maybe for Zelda, I'm going to discriminate against Kumi because you come from the part of the world where complacency may not be such a problem. But Seema, I mean, you guys are exceptions. I think you're exceptions. You're making a choice to live in Houston, right? Because you understand, because you've made a choice to understand, identify the next front line and like be there. I remember a story of a friend of mine who worked on the other side of the Brexit campaign, the Remain campaign, and was full of regret afterwards because she said all we did was have like little pickets in Hyde Park. You know, we didn't fight. We didn't, like what? And being in the U.S. now, yeah, there are the marches, and I still don't get a feeling that people understand what's at stake. So why do they not? I come from a country where people understand because they have to understand, you know. So does Kumi, but why?
I mean, I can only. I mean, I'm a very small person in terms of the people I'm sitting next to because I was an accidental.
That is absolutely not true.
But I was an accidental activist. I didn't make a choice. I just followed my heart and I did what felt right and what I thought was normal.
Sounds like a choice. Sounds like a choice to me.
I didn't sit and go, if I do this, I will be safe and comfortable. If I do this, I won't be. I didn't have those thoughts. I just moved forward doing what I thought. I also had no idea how effective. I mean, I didn't set out thinking that me speaking would make any difference. I just knew that I had to alert people to the bigger issue, that this was a systemic issue. This wasn't about one man. And if we were only looking at one man, which made it much easier for everybody because it kept all the other one men and other, you know, systems hidden, I didn't think my voice was going to make that much difference. But the biggest and most shocking surprise for me was when I was met with, I thought when I spoke to the press, then the grown-ups would come into the room and go, gosh, this is terrible, we're going to sort it out. And everybody went, yes, gosh, this is terrible. What are you going to do about it? And I realized I didn't really know what I was going to do about it, apart from, oh, well, maybe I have to speak to the lawmakers because we have to change law. You can't change humanity, human nature, you have to change law. I was 45 when I broke my NDA. I had never once spoken to my local MP. I had never even been to Westminster. And again, this is somebody who comes from a background where I was well educated. You'd have thought I understood how democracy worked, how the British parliamentary system worked. I had no idea at all. And I won't ever forget the first day that I went into Westminster, and I was fortunate with the politician that I happened to speak to, the female politician Maria Miller, who happened to be a Conservative MP, not somebody who you would particularly identify as a great activist. And in that 2-hour meeting, she completely empowered me, and I had this huge revelation, which was, these people work for me. These people work for me. They're my employees. I can't sit at home complaining that stuff isn't working unless I engage. And actually, of course, there are bad actors, within Westminster. There are bad actors in every sector. But what was fascinating is that most of them were desperate for that engagement. The ones that didn't want to help me, I didn't deal with. The ones that wanted to help me, I dealt with. And suddenly realizing that actually engaging, that was my change from being complacent. My complacency by just speaking up, and I thought someone else would take that role on. But realizing that to make that democratic system that I was privileged enough to live within, and yes, the levers are rusty, the buttons are sticky, but it does work. And, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But that engagement is what's needed.
And to
But
answer,
can we?
no.
Oh, okay. So I mean, I was gonna just give it from the perspective in Germany. I think a lot of people are complacent because they think it doesn't concern them. I have very close friends who see what I'm doing, and but they say things like, "Yeah, okay, but this is not my fight. This is Palestine. What does that have to do with me?" Palestine has everything to do with them, because the crackdown on protest, the crackdown on students, the crackdown on academic and artistic expression. It might go against Palestinians and their allies now, but it will go against the mainstream German, the blonde German, eventually. And I think this idea that this is not our problem, it's very much our problem. And waiting for people to realize that this is our problem is going to be too late. So, for example, when citizenship law gets applied to a Palestinian man who gets stripped of his citizenship for a social media post, this is a real story. This just happened. A journalist put under EU sanctions that can't access his own funds, but without any kind of way to defend himself. This is real. This is happening. People lost their jobs. So I think that making people understand, this could be this. If you don't care about Palestinians, and you don't care that the state that you're in is complicit, that's. I can't make you care. This is not possible. I cannot tell you one horrific story after another and make you care. But if you don't think this will concern you in the future with the kind of militarization and fascization of the state, that's a very naive way of looking at things.
I would say there's also a direct line from imperialism to colonization to authoritarianism, and the people that are getting it and are concerned in America, for the large part, are immigrants and migrants. And there's a new conversation happening quietly. I have a Venezuelan colleague as well. There's a new conversation because we recognize authoritarianism when it's here. And the people in America that have not had to deal with it in a very real way. We've not had to deal with war. We export our wars. When you could go at the height of the Afghan war to America and have a cappuccino and never realize you're in war. Same with Iraq. But the conversation is, what's your backup plan? If you get deported because of something you say, what's your other citizenship? Are you going? And these are the conversations that people that come from these countries, because we, as you said, Georgia has had to reckon with it. We are understanding this, and it won't make people care until it affects a very specific elite and privileged sector.
So I can, before you do, can I see whether there are questions? So that 1, 2, yeah, if we can get microphones to, but go ahead.
Quickly on
Well,
the exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to say that.
Can you hold the mic?
Sorry. So I just want to say, as somebody who's living and struggling in the global south, the exceptions that you talk about, represented here on this panel and in this audience, are the people that we are counting on so desperately, right? And I know that's like an unfair burden to almost put on you, but the reality is only y'all can change the dominant societies that y'all live in. So we want to just offer always our voice of solidarity. We can help the best we can, but really there's more power located in where 12% of the people in the world live, and we need to support it. And to Zelda, if you don't mind me saying, for me, I only met you here, but for me, what you did was an act of moral courage. You could have chosen to not do it. You made a choice, and thank God you made that choice, because it made such a big difference to women all over around the world. Thank you.
Let's take the question.
Hello. So you probably have seen the Guardian's Matthew Castle's.
Sorry, can you speak up? It's a little hard.
So probably you have seen the Guardian's Matthew Castle's videos about Gaza, or especially the episode called "Our Genocide," where he walks through the streets of Tel Aviv and talks to locals what they think. And I still remember two girls telling him that what's happening in Gaza is a Gaza wood, and also 18 years old boy, I don't know, says that like from the market that he gonna go to the army and he gonna kill the children there. And these people did not have any remorse or any empathy, and I was like really struggling to watch it, and even the journalist Matthew was barely holding the anger. So for me, it looks like these people are compliant of doing and supporting genocide. So what do you think of those people who are telling stuff like that? What is the price for them?
What is the price for people who are not taking action?
People who talk like support and saying like this is made up or call it Gazawood and that like the society itself.
So I mean, if you and then I think you should also say something. I would like to direct your attention to a foundation called the Hind Rajab Foundation. The Hind Rajab Foundation is set up to use universal jurisdiction to go after war criminals like the ones that you described. So they have filed cases in all countries, all kinds of countries, in I think in Chile, I think in India, in Brazil, etc., etc. So that the impunity that we seem to see with which soldiers, Israeli soldiers, commit their war crimes, boast about them online, that's very much a big part of the case that South Africa brought to the ICJ. A big part of that is not just the genocidal intent expressed by high-ranking Israeli officials, but also the soldiers committing the war crimes, boasting about it, ha ha ha, look at what we're doing, this is so great. And these things can and will lead to a form of accountability, at least in the near future, I hope, because they do this with the feeling of total impunity. But of course, we can slightly tilt the scale, so to speak, in our favor by making this have a price, which is an organization like the Hind Rajab Foundation does by, we are alerting the authorities in Thailand that such and such an individual is in your country, he has committed these and these crimes allegedly, we have this and this evidence, and they send it to you see what I mean? That maybe does that. But
I would say that's a choice to believe that person and their narrative. And I also wanted to say that silence is a choice. It is not divorced from action. It is an action unto itself. And that is a choice someone has made. I think James Baldwin, I'm going to butcher this quote, said, once a victim has learned to articulate their situation, they cease to be a victim. They are now a threat.
That's good.
Be the threat is what I would say. Be the threat. And I think even we're talking about these big systems, but it matters in small communities. If today at a party someone says a misogynistic joke, I expect the men who are sitting in this room who attend this to say, that's not okay. Actually, you can't do that. Or at work, it starts that small where you can course correct this on Palestine and on smaller things like that. But then, of course, getting to the Gaza question of what do we do with these soldiers who are committing not just war crimes, but also a collective moral injury on the rest of us watching it. We've become completely immune to it. So are the doctors that have gone there also lying? We can't believe, the Palestinian journalists have been discredited and murdered. So who are we going to believe? The people that just continue to build your narrative? That's very convenient.
yeah, I would also add that a journalist has just been murdered yesterday or today in Gaza. This is not, we're not talking in the past tense here. This is an ongoing situation. And we have to work to end the impunity. I think that's the key, is to end impunity and to reach accountability of some form. Otherwise, it will just never end. It will just keep going.
And if you think about Bosnia and that genocide, there was a bulldozer who, because I've worked in the mass graves there and dug up bones, there was a bulldozer who was told to bulldoze those mass graves into secondary and tertiary from the Bosnian Muslim concentration camps, secondary and tertiary graves. Do you think that he didn't know what he was doing? Of course he did.
Can I see if there are any hands or questions? I have a question. Let's go the front row and then in the back.
I think that what comes to my mind,
Can you hold it a little bit closer?
Yeah. What comes to mind, listening to all of your input on this conversation is for me, it's related complacency. It's related to this sense of hopelessness, you know. And I think that as humans, we want to put our energy when we want to put the seed where we feel that it will grow. And if violence beats you down, like communities and people affected by violence continuously and systematically, it beats you down in a way where you just stop responding. So to add on to, what's your name? Michael? No.
Kumi.
Kumi. You were saying that is intersectionality, right? How can we create something that brings us hope in the intersection of all our topics? And it's maybe a solution-oriented approach where we remind each other what's working. And maybe we can transpolate that to the fields that we're each one to. The doctor was saying about women dying in a parking lot. Jesus Christ, this is femicide, which is my thing, right? And then we can transpolate that to all of our fields. What is it working? What is the solution? And keep on insisting on bringing a solution conversation, because hopelessness will keep on eating us alive. And then we don't feel that putting the seed in the ground makes sense anymore. And this is when we become complacent, because I have been in meetings where I said, I don't have it within me today to just fight this battle. I'm gonna let this scenario, which is against everything I believe, just to grow in front of me, and I will say nothing. Because just today, it was just too much, as many days have come. And I think that's what comes to me, and I would like to see what opinions you have on that. For me, complacency has to be balanced up with something else that makes that seed grows. And I don't know, for me, it feels like hope and solution, and what is it working? Let's talk about solution.
Let's get the answer and get the mic over there.
So, to answer your wonderful comment, which I agree with 100%, with the anecdote, when I was Secretary General of Amnesty International, we gave the main award we have called the Ambassador of Conscience Award to Fridays for the Future and Greta and other young people leading it. And when I was behind the stage at the Kennedy Center in DC, before we went up for the presentation, I was sitting with all these young people, mainly young girls, actually, young women under the age of 18. And they were asking me questions like, so maybe we shouldn't be thinking about having kids, right? Because maybe we should not be thinking of having kids. And I was sitting there feeling just the horror of how my generation has failed. You know. And so when I present the award, I'm going to say, this is what we need to do. Because bottom line is, people go to meetings, people participate, people do things when they enjoy it. We are boring. Many of us are excessively boring. Me, I'm the president of the boring club, right?
Kumi, have you been bored at ZAG?
No, not so. I came here to be unbored. No, this is true. We have to make activism sexy. That's what I told the young people. We have to make it, and one of the most important things we need to do is not expect that every one of us have to contribute in the same way. If you're an arts teacher, then in your community, do murals about gender-based violence and so on, that you will enjoy doing it, working with young people. Don't take an arts teacher and put the arts teacher in a meeting to talk about constitution and rules and procedure and do finance. So let's create joyful pathways of participation. That's the only way we can get the largest number of people to participate in the struggle that at the moment they are spectators to. But it is their struggle and they need to be at the center.
But that also requires us to talk about the success. And I'm not at all bringing down what you've said. But as you said in on your first day in your session, we're winning battles, but we're losing the war. And and somebody asked me in my session, oh well, everyone says Me Too has failed. And I think the negative dialogue is part of the problem. Like you say, we have to talk about the success. We have to make it enjoyable. I feel a little embarrassed here to talk about the success of my campaign, because I feel like it seems so simplistic and so easy that I happen to, succeed. But actually talking about that success and talking about the ways that was made, rather than just talking about the endless barriers, discussing how we get around those barriers. And I think the first place is in the small, is in that, we don't want any bystanders. It is those tiny things. When you are sitting with friends and somebody says something, when you are sitting in your office and somebody says something, everybody should feel completely at ease to go, that's not okay. You don't have to have a fight. It's those small things that start the change, so that we connect as human beings, that we trust each other. And when we can trust each other, then we can be more powerful and we can challenge power much more. But the problem is we're constantly being divided against each other. We're constantly being told that, a activist is brave. That's not helpful, saying that a individual is brave, because it makes it hard for other people.
We are out of time, but I promised a question. So if the question is really short, we'll take it.
I'll try to make it short, but I'm not sure how short that might be.
It has to be short.
All right, I'll try to be very brief.
Thank you.
So I'm wondering, I really love the topic and the title for this, like what we choose not to see. So do you think, and thank you for this interesting discussion, but do you think that also choosing not to see the other side of the story is also a concern and an issue why there might not be a greater public support to the ideas that the humanitarian actors or people around us are working on? For instance, I often hear the wording like the Israelis, like about military crisis for the Israeli side, but what about the Hamas? What about the terrorist actions? I've never had throughout these days anyone talk about also the brutalities from the other side. So I totally understand there are crimes during the war from every side. But maybe one of the issues.
I'm going to interrupt because she said to be.
Sorry, I'll stop you.
I think we have to wrap up. I think the point is made, but what I would like to do very quickly, and maybe one or two of you, whoever wants to reply, why do we fail to learn lessons?
So one, the object of life is not neutrality. It is truth. And in truth, there are no two sides. There is one truth. There is a shared reality which we have lost touch with. That's why we cannot both sides genocide.
Say that again.
There is one truth. We're all living in these alternative facts and different because of the media landscape. But there is really one truth, and if you have a genocide, there are not both sides. You cannot both sides a genocide. And that is, neutrality is what we should be going for. Not neutrality, but truth is what we seek.
And I think it's very important also, when you have, there is no relativization of genocide, just as you said, there's no discussion about and saying what about this and what about that is not going to get us anywhere. What we have to aim at in this case is the system of oppression, which is a system of apartheid that it treats basically Palestinians as non-humans. And it leads to genocide in Gaza, it leads to ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, it leads to millions of refugees waiting for their right to return since 80 years. But this is all is a system of oppression that also leads to crimes being committed on all kinds of sides. But what we are after is an end to this system of oppression, which doesn't mean that we don't name a war crime here and there. This is not the point. The point is the system of oppression.
We have to get off stage.
Sorry.
But the conversation doesn't have to end. We're following Kumi's advice, making fighting oppression fun. There will be a party across the street later tonight, so I'm sure you can, yeah. Oh, sexy. Yeah, that's right, sexy. Thank you so much. Don't be complacent. Thanks, Seema.